Bolivia's socialist candidates officially registered to run in May 3rd's presidential election. Trinidad and Tobago blames U.S. sanctions on Venezuela for the cancellation of a major energy agreement. And GNA forces in Libya have mobilized towards a stronghold of General Khalifa Haftar. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the South. The candidates representing Bolivia's movement towards Socialism Party in the upcoming elections, Luis Arce Catacora and David Choquehuanca, have registered their candidacies at the Electoral Court. The candidates for President and Vice President were accompanied to the court by a large mobilization of popular sectors, including labor, campesino, and student unions. Recent polls from various agencies all show that the MAS EPSP party is in the lead with voters both in the presidential and in the congressional races. These electoral campaigns are taking place under clear political persecution by the de facto government against those who did not support last year's coup. Our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, has more.
Bolivia's electoral court is the center of attention today because this day is the deadline for political parties to register for the upcoming general elections. Registrations will take place until 6:30 p.m. local time, but electoral authorities say that political parties will still be able to change their lists a few days until the election. Unofficially, there are at least 8 or 9 politicians who will stand for the far-right parties that participated in last November's coup against former President Evo Morales. They are very vocal about their rejection of the MAS IPSP party. This electoral campaign takes place in the midst of a series of political and judicial persecutions, like the jailing of Mrs. Patricia Hermosa, Evo Morales' attorney, who was trying to register Morales as a candidate for the National Assembly. She was taken into custody and was sentenced to 6 months in preventive detention. She is accused of terrorism and sedition.
Quien portaba los documentos el viernes de la semana pasada.
We thank Freddy Morales for that report. Former Bolivian President Evo Morales has announced that the de facto government, which he refers to as the dictatorship, has ordered the arrest of his lawyer Wilfredo Chavez. Chavez has Morales' power of attorney after legal representative Patricia Hermosa was arrested on Friday and sentenced to 6 months preventive detention after carrying the documents required to register Morales as a legislative assembly candidate. Wilfredo Chavez is also the political delegate of the movement towards socialism on the new Supreme Electoral Tribunal. Bolivian former Minister Cesar Navarro and Deputy Minister Pedro Damián Dorado arrived in Mexico on Sunday, where they'll seek protection from the government. The two ex-officials of the Morales administration boarded an alternative flight after they were detained at the airport in El Alto on Saturday morning. There was a breach of the International Asylum Treaty, especially since they were granted safe conduct by Bolivia's de facto authorities. Mexico's Foreign Ministry said its diplomatic efforts, along with international support, ensured the men's safe release. Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has said that the major energy agreements signed with Venezuela back in August of 2018 had to be rescinded because U.S. sanctions make it impossible to do business with PDVSA. Speaking at the 2020 Energy Conference, Rowley said progress in the development of the unitized Loran Manatee field has been impeded by the sanctions imposed by the U.S. government, which inhibits U.S. companies from doing business with Venezuelan oil company PDVSA.
The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Bolivarian government of Venezuela have agreed to the independent development by each government of the field within the Loran Manatee cross-border that falls within its marine area. Pursuant to this decision, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela rescinded the unitization agreement for the exploitation and development of hydrocarbon resources of the Loran Manatee field that extends across the delimitation line between the countries dated August 16, 2010, and executed the agreement for the independent development of the cross-border field, Loran Manatee.
250 Venezuelans have returned to their country from Chile on the latest flight under the Return to the Homeland Plan. Many Venezuelans who migrated to other countries are opting to return following negative experiences such as work exploitation, xenophobia, and discrimination. The program is a free and voluntary initiative by President Nicolás Maduro, which has seen thousands of citizens repatriated, primarily from other South American countries.
Well, our expectations as we left Venezuela were very high. But while there are some people who are doing well, others aren't. But in my experience, and to anyone who asks, my advice is not to migrate. If they don't have the urgent need to migrate, then don't. My advice for them is to stay fighting in Venezuela, because coming to another country to work, to fight, to work more hours. And it's not about the hours, but about the wage, because what I get paid here is not enough to pay rent, services, food, to send anything to Venezuela. Life here is very expensive, so we can save at all. It's a lie to say that one can save in another country. It's false.
U.S. military members and contractors based in Colombia reportedly raped 54 girls between 2003 and 2007, recorded most of the sexual abuses, and sold it as pornographic material. The figures are part of a new report by the Commission on the Conflict and its Victims made by the government and former FARC members. The report was created to determine the origins and multiple causes of the armed conflict in Colombia. It includes cases of U.S. interference, counterinsurgency, and state terrorism. The author of the report says there was impunity due to bilateral agreements and diplomatic immunity by U.S. officials. Moving on, oil workers in Brazil continue their general strike against privatizations and massive layoffs by the government of Jair Bolsonaro. The Union of Oil Workers began the strike on Saturday, but is expecting more workers to join during the week. According to the union, close to 8,000 workers are already on strike across 10 states. They are protesting against the recent layoffs of almost 1,000 workers at the state-run oil company Petrobras. The strike closed 12 refineries on the weekend. Still in Brazil, indigenous people of the Guarani ethnicity are planting trees on ancestral territories in Sao Paulo after a real estate project cut down around 4,000 trees.
Brazilian construction company Tenda has cut down 4,000 trees in an area nearby the indigenous Jaragua territory, located in the park and natural reserve with the same name. The indigenous Guarani are the custodians of a green oasis which lies an hour away from the largest city in Brazil, Sao Paulo. They held an occupation of the area and spent 4 nights holding prayer for the chopped down trees.
The company says that it doesn't directly affect communities, but it does affect both directly renders effects. They're also committing an environmental crime. In principle, they said that they would only cut eucalyptus, but when we came, we saw that there are a number of dead native trees, as well as dead animals, like in the birds' nests.
The real estate project is looking to build 5 luxury buildings and is colluding with Sao Paulo City Hall. The indigenous people demand adherence to the right to prior consultation as per the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention of 1989, given that this is ancestral territory.
Our wood, our nature. I hope lawmakers understand what our concern is. We are very concerned. They are removing our territory. The earth is not mine alone. It belongs to all Guaranis. They must understand that.
Deforestation over the last 6 months has already exceeded the sum of all deforestation in 2018. The president believes that the indigenous people should be inserted into capitalism. They've responded to him by replenishing in an area where devastation has been left by the market and passed on to nature by planting 200 trees on the company's territory.
This place is protected by Janderu. Things that are part of the land should not be touched. We fight to acquire the territory, not just to own it. We think of everything that is our struggle and our cause. We fight for environmental preservation. We Guaranis fight for a cause for all, not only for the indigenous people.
While in Sao Paulo, real estate extractivism progresses over nature and wildlife, the federal government is preparing to liberalize laws which govern mining, hydroelectric, and agricultural activities on indigenous lands. The Guaranis have begun 2020 occupying, praying, and planting with help from the rain to strengthen the roots.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Forces loyal to Libya's government of national accord have started mobilizing against Khalifa Haftar's so-called Libyan National Army. A GNA armored vehicle convoy was seen heading towards Sirte, a coastal city controlled by Haftar. This latest potential offensive comes at the same time as a visit by military officers from both factions to the United Nations. They are there for talks aimed at securing a ceasefire after 10 months of fighting. At least 14 school children have been killed and several were injured after a stampede broke out in a school in Kenya. The cause of the panic has not yet been established as Kenyan police are still carrying investigations. More than 40 victims have been hospitalized.
Children of our colleagues have died. 14 children, including 9 girls. It is very, very painful. Your colleagues' children are like your own. 5 ambulances took away the injured children. We are appealing to the government to help us.
Malawi's constitutional court has nullified last year's presidential elections, calling for a new election. The court cited irregularities and deliberate alterations to the result, which made the elections neither free nor fair. According to the ruling, Peter Mutharika, who had been declared a winner of the presidential election, now becomes unduly elected president. This landmark ruling comes after a petition by opposition parties and a series of mass protests over the disputed results.
So the judgment basically says the commission failed in that respect. And as a result of the failure of the commissioners, here we are. We've all gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, and we're probably going to go through more. But it should be a lesson for those that are accorded the privilege to serve the country.
This week, government ministers, CEOs of mining companies and investors are meeting in Cape Town, South Africa for the 26th Investing in African Mining in Indaba, the world's largest mining investment conference.
The theme of the Indaba is optimizing growth and investment in the digitized mining economy. Top of the agenda seems to be attracting global investors to coal-driven mining projects, despite trends of investors to support greener sectors. South Africa's Mineral Resources and Energy Minister Gwedi Mantashe gave the opening address at the Indaba. Afterwards, he spoke to journalists and fielded questions about South Africa's energy problems. He announced that it is time for a new entity to provide electricity and reduce the nation's reliance on the state utility Eskom for its energy. He also warned that the transition from coal to renewable energy sources will not be a hasty process.
We're managing a fleet of 16 coal-power generated power stations. If we take an attitude of destroy coal-power generation immediately, we'll be taking a dangerous route because we are dependent on coal generated at this point in time, and therefore transition must be managed responsibly and carefully.
The 5-day event expects to host more than 6,000 participants, which include presidents, cabinet ministers, and at least 900 global investors. Johan Abrams for Telesur in Cape Town.
The U.S. primaries began on Monday night with the Democratic Party caucuses in Iowa. 11 candidates are vying for the party's nomination. The latest polls put Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, representing the right and left wings of the party, in the lead. Both of them have 22% of the preferences.
This election is about 2 fundamental issues. First, it is absolutely imperative for the future of this country that we defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. what that agenda says. Tomorrow night is the beginning. It is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump.
The state of Iowa is 90% white, but the Latin American community is growing and could have an important influence in the election. The Sanders campaign has been making a big push to win over the Latino vote.
Because they know that our community is growing very, very fast here in the state of Iowa and is expected to double by 2050 here in the state. And so it's important for us to be engaged in the process, especially here in Iowa, because we have a significant Latino population. Across the country, every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 and is eligible to vote, and we will be the largest non-white voting bloc heading into the 2020 elections. And if they're going to recruit friends and family to...
I felt the pain in my community when Trump was elected because he just created these narratives, you know, that criminalized, stereotyped immigrants in the U.S. and I decided that maybe, like, for this year, I actually want to work on making sure that Trump doesn't get reelected.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. The death toll from the novel coronavirus has risen to 361 in China, with one person dying abroad. On Monday, China denounced the decision by a number of countries to deny entry to people who have visited the country in the past 14 days. Beijing's ambassador for disarmament to the United Nations, Li Song, said such measures will not stop the spread of the virus, but only lead in the increase in stigma and discrimination against Chinese nationals. Earlier on Monday, the World Health Organization said that these measures unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade.
whose temporary recommendations do not recommend any travel and trade restrictions. We are all in this together. It concerns every country and everyone in this world. During the 2014 Western Africa Ebola outbreak, a high-level UN panel pointed out that taking excessive international travel restriction measures may lead some countries affected by the virus to stop voluntarily reporting information to the WHO out of fear of being impacted by potential restrictions. As mentioned by Dr. Tedros, we need facts, not fear. We need science, not rumors. We need solidarity, not stigma.
Meanwhile, the WHO has launched a campaign to combat the spread of false information surrounding the coronavirus. The UN Health Agency said it is working with social media firms to stop unverified news about the outbreak.
Combat the spread of rumors and misinformation. To that end, we have worked with Google to make sure people searching for information about coronavirus see WHO information at the top of their search results.
The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's so-called Middle East peace plan. The announcement was made during the organization's extraordinary meeting in Saudi Arabia. Speaking on behalf of other members, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Faisal al-Saud stressed the OIC's insistence on a comprehensive solution that guarantees the rights of the Palestinian people to establish a state with East Jerusalem as its capital. The 57-member body has also warned its members not to engage with the plan or to cooperate with the U.S. administration in implementing it in any form.
Saudi Arabia is supporting all the efforts to keep the wheel of negotiation moving and to achieve a fair solution for the Palestine cause. We believe that these efforts should have a final goal of delivering a fair solution for the Palestine people, to establish their independent country with Eastern Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with international legitimacy and decisions.
A court in Belgium has postponed the ruling on the extradition of the jailed Catalan leaders. The court was due to give its decision on the request made by Spain to have former Catalan President Carles Puigdemont and 2 former members of his cabinet extradited. The case will now resume on February 24th. Puigdemont was Catalonia's regional leader during the 2017 independence referendum that led to a short-lived declaration of independence for Catalonia. He fled to Belgium after being forced out of office by the Spanish government.
What we're asking for is that Spain respects the decision of the European Court of Justice of December 19, which Spain does not do. This is why we're asking for the cancellation of the European arrest warrant. The prosecutor, however, wants to suspend the procedure in order to wait for the European Parliament to make a decision before the discussions in Brussels on the European arrest warrants against Puigdemont and Comín. We refuse this. The Belgian judge must immediately make a decision and cancel the European arrest warrants, which manifestly violate European law and the right of immunity.
In Guatemala, residents of Pueblo Nuevo said goodbye to a migrant worker from the community who died in the United States. Her death is one of the over 100 Guatemalan migrant workers who died in the U.S. over the last year and whose undocumented status brings complications even in death.
The community of Pueblo Nuevo in the department of El Quiché bids a final farewell to Reina Elizabeth Lucas, the first Guatemalan migrant to die in the United States in 2020. She was killed in a traffic accident in Oklahoma.
The body arrived here in Guatemala, and we held a holy mass in the house this morning. And right now, we are to say our final goodbyes here in the church.
Reina Elizabeth Lucas was a mother of 4 who was a migrant worker at a university in the United States.
She went to work at 7 in the evening and left at 6 in the morning. She had a clear vision for her life, and so we regret that this happened to her.
According to the Ixcan Development Association, ADESI, at least 17 migrant workers from the department died in 2019 while working abroad.
We had the bodies of 14 men and 3 women returned from the United States and Mexico. But the deceased are usually returned from the United States because that is where they were working.
As most of the deceased were undocumented migrants, family members don't receive fair compensations or even justice after their death.
I think it's important to seek support. It is fair to seek justice from a court for those who had died at work.
In 2019, the Guatemalan foreign minister recorded the death of more than 100 migrants in the United States.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.